Hello, I'm Brian Roten, senior reporter for Hotel News Now, and I'm here with Jim Butler, founding partner of the law firm Jeffer Mangels Butler Mitchell, and founder and chairman of the law firm's Global Hospitality Group. Today, we're going to talk about California's new junk fees law and what that means for hoteliers. Jim, thank you so much for joining us here today.
My pleasure, Brian. Thank you for having me.
Let's get into it. California passed a law last year and it went into effect July 1st this year. It targets hidden fees or junk fees, as some call them, with the goal of making businesses more transparent with their pricing of goods and services. Jim, can you tell us what this law actually does and help clear up any misconceptions people may have about it? What does it do? What doesn't it do? Who does it apply to?
Yes, well, first, there are actually two laws. The main law that everyone is talking about is a new section added to the California Civil Code, Section 1770A, and that is a prohibition on enumerated items that are deceptive and unfair business practices or misleading and deceptive consumer interactions.
Okay.
It added a new section 29. So there was bait and switch and some of the other common consumer fraud items, but now we have a new item 29 added by the law that was originally adopted last October and signed with an effective date of July 1, as amended by a 11th hour rush of emergency legislation to create certain exemptions for restaurants, bars, groceries, and other food providers. It's normally called the restaurant exemption for short, but
Gotcha.
that is the main piece of legislation. There is another law that is essentially a copy of the AHLA sponsored model at the federal level, and that goes into the Business and Professions Code. And so we can talk about both those. That's important because it has a $10,000 per violation civil penalty that can be assessed for each and every violation of that. But if you're complying with one, you'll comply with the other. That second law applies only to hotels, motels, and short-term lodging. Includes Airbnb, renting your home if you use some kind of a internet platform and so forth, any kind of 30-day or less short-term lodging rental.
Gotcha. Yeah, that sounds kind of important. Well, let's talk
Ah,
about that too.
great.
So, yeah, can you just kind of lay out the essentials of what both of these laws do exactly?
Sure. Well, this dispute or this issue has been brewing for the better part of 20 years. I mean, it goes back really into the late 90s. It started with things like there was something called an energy surcharge, and hotels mostly, but sometimes other businesses would simply add something to their bill because energy costs were so high. Electricity was very, very expensive. There were a lot of consumer lawsuits about it because it was not a government tax. The government wasn't saying, pay us X dollars.
Hmm.
The hotels were just, and other businesses, uh, taxis, deliveries, anybody who was using energy incurred the problem. They just added something to help defray the cost. And it was a hidden fee. It
Hmm.
you didn't have a price of a $10 hamburger or a $100 room, or you did have that price, but added on with something called this surcharge. Um, Sometime after that, the um, hotels began coming up with the resort fee, the destination fee. There are hundreds or dozens of labels for it. It
Hmm.
is really any mandatory charge that is not optional. That's what it means, that isn't included in the price. So the so-called junk fees are these mandatory fees. In the early days of resort fees, you could actually talk to the hotel, or at least I talked to one or two of them, where I went into Vegas for a business meeting. I got in at 10 o'clock at night, and I left the next morning at 7:30, and they charged me a resort fee. I said, guys,
Yeah.
thanks. I didn't have a chance to enjoy it. And in the early days, they would often remove the fee if you requested.
Sure.
But these have become over the years, um, according to the FTC, a source of more than $2.9 billion of income for hotels on resort fees or similar mandatory fees. It doesn't matter
Mhm.
what they're called. And there really has been consumers hate them. They just hate these things.
I mean, who
Uh,
likes paying more for
uh,
something that you think is already included?
well, exactly. Or the FTC in its study, the FTC has really pioneered the way on the fight against junk fees. They
Mhm.
had a authoritative study done in 2012 that examined all kinds of records and data and so forth, and found that these were anti-competitive. They prevented hotels from competing. They thereby avoided the benefits to consumer of competition that's supposed to be part of our free economy, confused consumers, and really irritated the daylights out of them, and declared in 2012 that these, whatever you call them, hidden fees, these
Mhm.
mandatory fees, were a deceptive practice. They constituted effectively consumer fraud, that they were a violation of Section 5 of the FTC. And it was just a study that
Mhm.
made that declaration, but it was a foundation for years of litigation that ensued by state attorneys general. There were, I don't remember, I think it was 28 attorneys general that banded together and basically went after the hotel companies for uh, consumer fraud, on
Mhm.
attacking the destination fees or whatever they were called. And I think it is an important part of the background that the hotel industry fought those tooth
Right.
and nail. Now, those lawsuits are expensive. There were government regulatory enforcement actions, there were consumer actions, there were class actions. That's expensive. This is not five or $10,000. You're moving into six or seven figures to fight these things. And ultimately, most of those have been settled on various terms or gotten rid of. And I think it is a lesson to all industries, but certainly the hotel industry, that after the AHLA and every major brand, Marriott, Hilton, Hyatt, Wyndham, I mean, all the brands got sued in this, and many individual hotels, that they were fighting a war of attrition that they were going to lose, and various states were beginning to adopt regulation that posed the threat of conflicting regulation. That New York could have one set of rules and California something else, and Michigan something else, and it could be a nightmare to try to comply with all these different rules when your main advertising is on the internet or in magazines or public means. How do you shape a communication that only goes to New York residents, or
Mhm.
it doesn't work. And so it is interesting that the AHLA in the last couple years has completely changed the position. I think the sadder but wiser girl, as they say, they learned and picked a very wise course for the industry. After experience and after fighting this for years, and decided that they were better off with a single national standard. And that has been their theme.
Mhm.
The AHLA has officially endorsed the FTC proposed rule that was last issued in November 8 of 2023, but it had prior versions. I think 2017 was the earliest, and the essentially that became the model for legislation that was passed in the House this year. It was not presented yet to the Senate. The Senate had, however, passed or had introduced a very similar bill. Not exactly the same wording, but they're the same concept. And
Sure.
if they ever can focus on things like hotel legislation as opposed to other issues, they will probably get around to it. But that became, that is what the California basic law, the 1770A, the transparent pricing or honest pricing law, the basic consumer law was based on. It cites extensively the FTC proposed rule with all these findings and studies and so forth. And the concepts are directly, the record and the introduction of the legislative history show that with great admiration, they appreciated the groundwork that had been laid by the FTC. And that's essentially the model that California adopted.
Gotcha.
But to be clear, it was the first comprehensive regulation of mandatory fees in the United States. The federal regulation had not been adopted. It's still a
Mhm.
proposed rule. The legislation in the House and Senate is still pending. I mean, that was the father and the model of
Mhm.
the law. But California adopted last year the first comprehensive law. It basically applies to all businesses. So that law is not limited to hotels or to restaurants. It basically um, declares that it is a deceptive practice. Item number 29, 1770, little a 29, capital A, prohibits the advertising of a price for a good or service to consumers. So this doesn't apply to commercial transactions, a B2B type thing, which fails to include all mandatory fees and charges, with the sole exception being taxes and reasonable and actually incurred delivery charges. You do not have to include that in the
Okay.
price. So uh, the key concept here is mandatory. If it's optional, if you want to get the pink Jeep ride to go out and into the desert, that's an option that tourists can decide to take. That isn't part of your room charge if you're going to Sedona or someplace such as that. Uh,
Okay.
there may be some issues about what is optional versus mandatory, but that is the essential rule. And again, we'll talk about the restaurant exemption when
Mhm.
you're ready. That uh, was introduced on June 7, with the bill going in, becoming effective July 1, and it was signed by the governor on June 29. So 48 hours
Just a little bit of
before
wiggle room.
this comprehensive ban on junk fees went into effect, the restaurant industry and the labor union Unite Here pushed through an exemption of sorts that I frankly think is a dangerous trap for restaurants, and they need to look at it very carefully. But that provides, we'll call it an exemption with traps that you have to take care of for restaurants. And there are a few regulated businesses that do not have to comply with this. For example, if you are a bank or a financial entity, as they call it, which has to comply, and they enumerate, I'm going to say 10, 12 different laws, like the Federal Truth in Lending or certain,
Okay.
you know, uh, regulations that govern financial institution. If you are a financial entity and are governed by those laws, then you are exempt from this law, the California Civil Code Amendment. If you are regulated by the FTC on your advertising and you comply with the FTC regulations, then you do not have to uh,
Okay.
comply with it. But there are just a few exemptions, except for this, 11th hour restaurant
Right.
issue that came in.
So, if I'm a guest, I'm looking at hotel rooms online. What this means for me is when I see the price for the room per night as advertised, that's going to include all the mandatory fees that I'm
The
gonna have to pay. It's gonna show the price is gonna be higher because it includes all those fees, but it's more closely, taxes will be added in later, but that's more closely going to resemble what my nightly rate is when I look at the final bill.
Exactly, Brian. The mantra of those who sponsored the bill, although they compromised at the end with this restaurant exemption,
Mhm.
was the price you see is the price you pay, so that and that there are no mandatory extras that get added. The FTC's view of this was that did this study. It is really worthwhile looking at if you're going to get into the area and you want to understand it. They were worried about two things. They wanted the free market competition of uh, price to price,
Mhm.
and they felt that if two hotels are advertising their room, the market will provide guidance and reward those who provide an efficient price. So, but to do that, you have to be able to see the price.
Right.
Is the room $100, or when you get done with all the add-ons, is it really 150? And once now before it was buried too deeply, that the consumer had to find a room, had to see what they had, it was after they had already gotten into it and were invested in the
Mhm.
process that they finally got it. And they want something very opposite. They want you to be able to say, oh, that one's 125, this one's 135. Which one do I want? Do I like the location? Do I like the amenities or whatever? So they wanted the competition in the marketplace, and they felt that the investment that consumers had to make in going so deeply before they got the full price was a consumer fraud, that it caused consumers to pay more than they should be as intelligent consumers if and they would have made different decisions if they had the full information.
Do the new laws, do they apply to hotel listings on OTA platforms? Because I know, I've heard, when dealing with hotel, like when you for ADA requirements and putting the ADA accessibility features in a hotel room, that's you have to have that on your website, but that doesn't necessarily apply to the OTA listing for it. Does this
It
law apply to if Expedia has my hotel room listed, are they including everything on there like I would for my own, direct booking?
Yes, it does. The law is very direct, and the other law that we'll talk about, the one with the $10,000 civil penalty per violation, expressly does the same thing as well. The law applies to any person who advertises, displays, or offers a price for a good or service that does not include the mandatory charges. So it specifically applies to web platforms, meta search, and those situations. They don't want people going, oh, well, the search company got it wrong, or Expedia must have messed up. So uh, it's going to hold everybody to the standard. And part of the importance of this, I think um, most of the well advised people in the business started preparing for this law last year when it was adopted and passed and used effectively the months before the July 1 effective date to figure out what they were going to do to get in compliance. But we are seeing a lot of out of state companies that sort of have just awakened and are saying, oh, well, wait, this applies to us. And the answer is if you are advertising to California residents, the law applies to you. Or if you are advertising from California. So it doesn't matter whether if you're in California advertising anywhere to California or out of state, it applies to you. If you're out of state, a lot of Californians go to New York City or Chicago or New Orleans. So the hotels that are advertising on the internet or sending out their email list or making offers in any way to their club members, and if they're California residents, the law applies.
We've seen this before with both Europe's GDPR, their privacy protection laws, and even California's own privacy protection laws for consumers. It follows the citizen. It's not locked to a geographic border. This
Exactly.
is
Yes.
so.
Well, it makes sense when you think about it,
Mhm,
and that's had an outsized effect. Um, some people think California is a leader in innovative regulation. Some people laugh and say California is where all the crazy things come from. But California does have a significant international impact
mhm.
when you are either it's what the fifth largest economy in the world. It its citizens and its business is important, and advertising to its citizens. It if you're going to comply with the law for Californians, it kind of makes sense for you to just do it across the board, not to try to fashion something for Californians. And we've seen that with cruise lines, the major brands, and so on. It may take a while to develop a uniform approach to it, and there may be. Well, I think you raised a point that is good, like the ADA, which is enforced both by government agencies and in various states by private consumer lawsuits. The first law we're talking about, this California Civil Code honest pricing law, is enforceable by private citizens. There are class actions that are specifically authorized for it. Um, there are punitive damages as well as actual damages. And um, most importantly, for the lawsuits, for the plaintiffs that make these claims, there are attorney's fees. Uh, the ADA is a very different law, except
Mhm.
that this concept of consumer enforcement so that the government doesn't have to use its uh, officials and pay for the lawsuits. Many states thought that was an answer to a financial problem. In the ADA, it has created a plague of lawsuits. There are more than 40,000 ADA lawsuits. Accessibility, website, line of access, and they are many people say that the people who file these, some of them file hundreds of cases a week. They're blackmail lawsuits, and they don't care whether the property is accessible or not. This is a livelihood for either the attorneys or the plaintiffs that do it. Well, with the attorney's fees clause, punitive damages, and class actions, this law holds some of that same potential to attract plaintiffs. Now, we don't do that, Brian. Let me just add, we
Sure.
we represent the owners and
Right. Yeah.
managers and operators. We help them comply with the laws. We help them defend these claims. So this we are trying to help the industry understand and comply, but they need to understand that there may be a real plague of lawsuits for the junk fees. We are seeing some of that. Uh, I follow junk fee law developments, and I've seen a number of law firms that have now set up websites and effectively advertisements. Have you paid a junk fee? It doesn't matter when, we'll help vindicate your rights. So there are people out there who are offering free legal representation to go sue people who have improperly collected fees that may be a violation of this code section.
We've talked about this a little bit. We've teased it enough. So let's go into the restaurant exemption here. Why? What is the restaurant exemption? Why was it added at the last minute? And why do you think it's potentially a trap?
Great questions. Um, I think ultimately the restaurant industry will conclude when they see the traps and see the litigation and the problems that this was a Trojan horse, not a real gift and not a benefit. The restaurant industry had a powerful um, alliance with the California Restaurant Association, which was determined to avoid application of the law, and they got Unite Here, the labor union that's making. It's one of the big organizers of
Hmm.
hotels and restaurants in California. They got them behind them, and for their own purposes, they believed that this would help them with their membership or their political pull. Um, Unite Here and the unions are uh, some of the largest donators to political campaign funds up and down the spectrum from local, county, city, state, national office. And when they say they need something, everyone from President Biden or whomever his successor would be, um, to local and state people listen to it. They want to run for reelection. They want to move on from Bonta. The attorney general wants to become the governor. The governor wants to become the president. All these people listen to the union because they're very, very powerful. And uh, again, I think it was a mistake, but the union thought it was helping restaurants by the carve out. The press, it was clear from the language originally drafted that this applied to all businesses except a very few highly regulated
Hmm.
businesses, as I've said before. But the Attorney General's office on May 8, remember, just a little over a couple months before the July 1 date,
Hmm.
came out with something they called the frequently asked questions about the new law. And in the FAQs, it went through examples and all kinds of examples. Several of the questions were, does this apply to restaurants? And they said, of course it does. They are offering a price for a
Right.
good or service, etc. So yes, and talked about how the restaurants, it tends to be the mandatory service fee that 20%. We just paid 25% for an event that we had at one of the big branded events. They're pretty shameless and pretty bold. 25% mandatory service fee, phenomenal. Um, but um, the the restaurants said in their campaign, we can't survive. We're the struggling moms and pops. And this is the way we're barely keeping our doors open. They also said some things that are just untrue. Their campaigns claimed they couldn't raise prices. That is not true. The law does not regulate price.
Hmm.
The party can charge whatever they want, but they have to put that first price has to include all the charges except government taxes
Right.
and delivery charges. So if your hamburger is really $12 because you have a 20% service fee, you can't say it's a $10 hamburger and then have a little sign or something that says, oh, and we have a 20% mandatory charge. The law would have made you say you can charge $12, you can charge $50, anything you want, but you can't chop it up and hide it
Yeah.
in different places. Uh, they sold that, or rather, they called the political card from all the contributions they made, and they passed an exemption which applies to this is in 17 California Civil Code 1770 little a number 29. Number 29, capital A, is the prohibition on advertising, displaying any price with the consumer that doesn't include mandatory. And D, capital D, like David, is the
Hmm.
restaurant exception. That says this paragraph has to mean paragraph 29, and specifically 29A, does not apply to any mandatory fee or charge in a consumer transaction, uh, any offer or display or other offering by, and then it has two categories. It says by a restaurant, bar, grocery, food providers, etc.
Hmm.
The first category, restaurants, or by means of a menu or contract for catering services.
Okay.
And the last clause that fully discloses the terms of service. So everybody, the press has taken that to mean, oh, the whole new law, this paragraph 29, does not apply if you're a bar, restaurant, grocery, etc. And there's another clause that the last phrase I mentioned is going to come back to bite us. So remember that fully discloses the
Hmm.
terms of service. Um, and D, that this exemption has a second paragraph that the restaurant exemption is subject to paragraph 2. This exemption, paragraph 2 says that all mandatory fees and charges are conspicuously and clearly displayed. And then it says, and it adds another section to the code that defines, this is 1770C, it says that starting July 1, 2025, clearly and conspicuously, as used in this section, means what 1791U says. 1791U is a provision that just defines clearly and conspicuously. And it
Okay.
says whenever clear and conspicuous or clearly and conspicuously are used, it means set off and more apparent by virtue of a different font or size or type or color or something that sets off the phrase that is supposed to be clearly and conspicuously. So uh, uh, we're going to bring this all down now. The press is saying, number one, restaurants, bars, etc., are exempt because of D,
Hmm.
and we don't have to disclose anything. It doesn't really kick in for us until July 1, 2025, because that's when the definition of clearly and conspicuously goes into effect. Here's what I think a lot of plaintiffs are going to claim. And if you really want to fight the battle, good luck. I think it is a dangerous and expensive battle. And the real answer is disclose it and learn lessons from what the hotel industry has gone through. Number one, I think that in the first clause, it is not any restaurant or bar that's exempt. It is any of those named categories of
Hmm.
entities that are displaying a price, and that price must fully disclose the terms of service. Our high school English teacher could have diagrammed this horrible sentence in 29D and said, well, maybe that only modifies the offer by means of a menu or contract. Maybe they should have said at the beginning, This paragraph does not apply if you meet subparagraph 2 and you fully disclose terms of service, da, da, da.
Hmm.
It's unfortunate. People argue about the commas, but it is a ambiguity in the law that I'm sure is going to result in litigation. And if you're saying this law doesn't apply to me because I don't have to disclose it until 2025, I think that's a loser. The, the second part of that on the 2025, uh, I believe that uh, both 1770A 29A, the prohibition, requires clear and conspicuous display of mandatory charges, and requires them to be included in the price. But the exemption, I believe, is going to be interpreted. It has to be clearly and conspicuously displayed. You don't have to meet the test of 1791U of using a different color or size or setting the statement off by symbols or something. That doesn't apply to you until July 1, 2025. But it still has to be clearly and conspicuously, and the test is going to be a reasonable man test. Not was it on the back of the menu or on a 3x5 card under the table. So restaurants, I think, they did get a pass. They do
Hmm.
not have to go with the price. The first price is the total price, but they really need to disclose any of the hidden fees. And the law also requires that there be a statement of the purpose of the fees. We think that what has passed up to now, or what has been the common practice, is not going to cut it. That when you say it's a service fee and you add 20%, service fee does not disclose
What's
to
in
the
that
consumer.
service?
Is that going to the restaurant and just goes into its general fund? Is it put into a trust fund for your workers, for the front desk? What does it mean?
Hmm.
Uh, if you have a contract with a union or your employees, and you literally have a trust fund so that you put 20% into that account and you treat it like a trust fund, where if you dip into there to meet the rent, you're breaching a
Yeah.
duty and going to be held liable, strictly liable for that, then you can say we set aside 20% in a spec, but saying service fee isn't going to cut it, or at least I believe a lot of plaintiffs are going to try that argument out, and it could be very expensive to try to win. Same thing for any of the mandatory charges. San Francisco, there's always something. This is only limited by the human imagination. San Francisco does have to set aside certain health insurance benefits for their restaurant employees if they meet certain tests. They're permanent employees. They've been employed for a certain period of time. Then they have to buy insurance for their employees. But it is not a tax from the city of San Francisco that they collect. It is a requirement that employers provide that. And the employers have to file reports showing that they do. So um, you can say, if this really goes to the company and they just use that like anything else, and can use it for the rent or use it for insurance or use it whatever, that disclosure you make must be accurate, or it's going to be a violation of the law. So I just think this is going to be plaintiffs, lawyers, Disneyland, to file class actions for huge amounts of money that potentially have huge exposure to restaurants.
So, taking a step back from this specific and just looking at where we are right now in terms of the discussion of within hospitality of the transparency of these fees, we see you know Congress has a bill that they're considering dealing with this, the transparency issue. We have California, which has actually done something. We have multiple states through their attorneys general that have settlements with uh, hotel companies. Uh, at some point, I have to imagine it's just going to be how it is. That we're going to have greater transparency, for the upfront pricing of a hotel room, wherever you are in the U.S. When regardless of which state you live in, they're just going to everyone's just going to do it because they want to take care of it themselves before it's forced upon them. So how soon do you think that's going to happen? Like is this the writing on the wall? This is like, okay, this is it. Let's you know let's part as the AHLA has done. Let's be part of figuring this out as opposed to fighting it. Let's be you know involved so we can at least have some say, so we can guide it. Is that where you think we're eventually going to go? We're going to have the transparency and the pricing, and the hotel industry is going to have some chance, some opportunity to help guide it.
I think that's right. I really applaud the AHLA for its judgment and wisdom in trying to control this so it doesn't become an unworkable regulatory patchwork that is expensive and difficult or impossible to comply with. And I think um, the FTC ultimately was right. Consumers really do not like these fees. Uh, the prices need to be what they are, and people will have to get used to the fact that with increased labor costs and energy costs and all the other issues in operations, it just costs more. But rather than hiding the various costs in pockets that are difficult to discern, it's going to have to be upfront pricing. I think the hotel industry, it'll be uncomfortable for a little while as we sort this out. It won't happen immediately, but um, uh, it is better than the alternative. The AHLA made a wise decision. Um, I just saw, I think it's Michigan adopted its own version of the California law. It goes into effect in 2025. New York has done some patchwork things. They started with ticket sales, for live
Mm,
events,
mhm.
but they are getting into it. This is not just a California phenomenon. The politicians in other states are finally responding to their consumers and voters who say, we're mad as hell. We won't take it anymore. No more junk fees.
Yeah. I mean, the one benefit here, at least for hoteliers, is if everybody's doing it, then you don't have to worry about, well, I'm charging the same nightly rate as my competitor, but I'm adding in the fees and they're not. Everyone's doing it, so everyone's prices will go up in the
Yes.
same way.
The, well, and uh, it also is a tremendous benefit to the hotel industry that all short-term rentals are included. So,
Mhm.
in cities like New York City, you had as many rooms available in the market through Airbnb and other short-term rentals as you had hotel rooms. That's 100% competition that isn't subject to the same kind of regulation and all the other issues, licensing that
Mhm.
hotels have to put up with. But now they also have to do it. I think that is a tremendous leveling of the playing field. You are so spot on with the importance of the level playing field. The FTC, in one of its proposals and studies, said, I wish I could remember the company, I can't remember it now, but they said in an industry that one of the market leaders, perhaps that had the largest market share, tried to go to transparent pricing so that it just charged X dollars for its service and eliminated all of the other fees that were involved.
Mhm.
And by doing that, it lost market share. And
Sure.
after a few months, had to stop. So, this is like selling satellite service, but there's an installation charge or a connection fee, or there are junk fees.
Right.
When you're advertising, it's $29.99 a month. It's not. It's going to cost you $150 to get it installed, and all these. So every industry learned how to charge junk fees, and now I have a Google search item going for junk fees because I kind of fell into this niche. I'm seeing plumbers advertising transparent pricing and all kinds of other vendors. Well, law applies to them. They're
Yeah,
selling us
makes sense.
for
Yeah.
good. And if they've been charging, you know, transportation and all their services are rendered at the consumer's home, how do you? It's going to be a mandatory charge. How do you uh, tell them a price? Giving them a price per hour doesn't do it. Plus $150
Right.
delivery or whatever. So um, uh, some people have got the idea before the law became effective. Actually, got behind it, and you'd see uh, air conditioning, transparent pricing, all costs included. Cruise lines adopted before the effective date.
Mhm.
This is something that people can get behind and then figure out how to produce your good or service either more efficiently, or what are the features that consumers should use to select yours over the competitors.
Gotcha. Makes a lot of sense. Just get it all out there. Price A is going to be the same as price B, and as long as they both are apples to apples on the initial advertised price, then, as you said, level playing field. So,
Yeah. Some would say it took too long. It may have taken 20 years. It certainly has taken 10 or 12, and but we are well on our way.
well, Jim, we're coming up on our time here. Thank you so much for helping us break this down for our listeners, and thank all of you for listening. Stick with Hotel News Now for further coverage.
Hi, I'm Davon Reed.
I'm Omari Head.
And I'm Chris Henry.
We're the hosts of the Next Gen and Lodging podcast on the Hotel News Now podcast network. It's a monthly show in which we interview a new generation of hoteliers to get their insights into a variety of disciplines and topics, from finance to food and beverage and hotel operations. Listen to us on Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thanks for listening. This interview was recorded on July 24th, 2024, and produced and edited by Brian Roden. Go to hotelnewsnow.com every day for the latest in hotel industry news.